Well, there are some brand new NFL coaches that have a lot to prove, but there are those that are veteran coaches that have even more to prove in 2024.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
What's going on, football fans, and welcome into another episode of the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. For this Friday, you got a couple of folks standing in for your favorites, Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson. You've got Ross Jackson at Ross Jacksonola. Been with you here throughout most of the week. Excited to bring you more of the NFL content that you crave, and of course, these elite breakdowns and in-depth analysis. And I'll tell you what, it doesn't get more elite, more in-depth than the one, the only Joe Marino, who joins me today at the Joe Marino on your favorite social media. Today, we're going to be diving into the Buffalo Bills a bit. Where does Josh Allen rank amongst the NFL and potentially even the history's dual threat quarterbacks? We're going to take a look at some NFL head coaches that could jump up a tier and maybe move into elite conversation or close to elite conversation with a fantastic 2024 performance. But before we get to all that, we're going to take a look at the coaches that need 2024 just to save their tails. We got all that coming up for you on today's episode of the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. And we appreciate you, of course, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day, and bringing every day or here on this show, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Joe, not only as the daily host over at Locked On Bills, but also with Kyle Krabs over at Locked On NFL Scouting, you guys did a fantastic job ranking, tiering all of the NFL coaches. And I want to dive into the bottom of your list. And I imagine that there are some names down there that are folks that have to prove themselves for the first time, but I really want to focus on those that are interspersed between there that are veteran coaches. What does it take for a veteran coach who is in that type of conversation to turn the conversation around to make it a little bit more positive going from one season to the next?
You know, Ross, one of the interesting things in putting together these rankings is it's a collaboration of my list and Kyle Krabs' list. Mm-hmm. We average it all together and it gives us the list. And Kyle and I both had a different approach to stacking the coaches. And I would say the biggest difference was that Kyle was more willing to project things than I was. I was far more rooted into, all right, what have you actually told us? But the line that Kyle came back to on our episode that we did breaking down these head coaches that I really like is these coaches that are established, that are weaved into guys that, you know, have never coached a game in the NFL, right, as a head coach. Mm-hmm. The reason that they get down there with these guys that haven't coached yet is we know who you are and we don't like it very much, right? so that's what earns you that spot here at the bottom. And for some of these guys that have coached a year or two, you can see the ceiling and the path forward, and it's just a matter of, you know, maybe some of the circumstances that prohibited them over the last season that pushes them down. Meanwhile, there's some other guys where you're just wondering, you know, are we just buying time here? Are we just trying to get through this season? Did you not like the potential replacement options, right? There's always other factors in place. So that's what's going to be kind of interesting to flesh out with you here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to diving into this conversation. I was wondering if that had a little bit to do with it, because it's kind of like you end up in these situations where you have these rookie coaches who still have to prove something, but then there are the guys that have proved that there's not really anything less than the potential, or there's a lot less than the potential that's out there for the others. So, Joe, let's go 32 back to get to the bottom 10 here. I'll go through the names, and then we'll highlight and focus on the guys that are returning coaches, right? That have at least a year of experience here. So at 32, the New Orleans Saints head coach, Dennis Allen, falls there as the bottom coach in the NFL. Now, these are really in tiers too, so we can kind of, maybe some of these guys can jumble depending upon certain levels of conversation, whatever, but we'll just keep it simple and go bottom 10. So in the bottom 10, we've got Dennis Allen of the New Orleans Saints, Dave Canales of the Carolina Panthers, Brian Callahan of the Tennessee Titans, Gerard Mayo of the New England Patriots, Antonio Pierce of the Las Vegas Raiders. So that's our first five. Then our second five gets into more of these guys that are not first-time head coaches. Jonathan Gannon, Arizona Cardinals. We go to Robert Saleh of the New York Jets. We get a first-time guy in Mike McDonald with the Seattle Seahawks. Brian Dable, a returner for the, or not a returner, but returning for the New York Giants, though I'd love to see Brian Dable return to kicker too. That could be a lot of fun. And then Matt Eberflus of the Chicago Bears. So Matt Eberflus, Brian Dable, the Jets head coach Robert Saleh, Jonathan Gannon of the Cardinals, and then Dennis Allen of the New Orleans Saints. Those are the 5 with experience that are in this bottom tier, interspersed with some of these guys that haven't gotten the opportunity to prove anything yet. Who stands out to you as the one that maybe is at the greatest disadvantage to turn perception around?
I feel like that's Dennis Allen, the head coach
Feels
of the
right.
New Orleans Saints, comes in 32 for Kyle and I. And that's interesting because they got better in the second season, at least in terms of the record, 7-10 to 9-8.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels dicey in New Orleans. And defensively, there's so much to like about the team. Like, I have no concerns about the defensive side of the football. And that, of course, comes with some tenure. Dennis Allen was the defensive coordinator for a number of years and had a lot of success prior to becoming the head coach. And so you look at him a little bit differently. It's not like he was a brand new guy coming in. There was some core things that align with him that were already in place when he became the head coach. And defensively, I feel like really strong, and they will continue to be very strong this coming season. But he did kind of an entire defensive coaching staff last year, and it worked out. This year, they gutted the entire offensive coaching staff. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the tight ends coach is the only guy that's left.
That's right.
Got rid of everybody. And I understand that. I think that's where it's a little bit different. Pete Carmichael, kind of a carryover from Sean Payton, and it's your turn, right? It's your turn to be the head coach, and you want to put all your fingerprints on it. And I think it's a big roll of the dice. Not necessarily to replace the offensive coaching staff. I don't think that was a poor decision at all. But in a make or break year where you feel like you got to have it, to lean into everything new on the offensive side of the football, where not only do you have to see the coaching come together, but how about this offensive line? And like, is Ramczyk even going to be available? Can Penning play? Waga ready to go? Is Saldiveri going to be okay at left guard? Like, there's questions about that. There's questions about, what's this running back tandem of Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams? Is there something to be excited about there? This has to come together very quickly. How good's Derek Carr? Derek Carr's never been a quarterback where just because he's your quarterback, you go to the playoffs, right? He's not that type of guy. And I don't think he particularly had a great season last year, especially when you think of situational splits, got to have it moments, red zone, just not at his best. And so I get nervous about this combination offensively, and offensively, it has to work. It has to work for the Saints this year in a division that you feel is competitive, but I don't know. Are they as good as Tampa? Are they as good as Atlanta? I kind of find them to be the third team right now. So you can convince me that they can make a run and it can all happen, but I don't know. I look at Dennis Allen in totality, the way this offense has to go together, the way things were with the Raiders. I mean, really kind of a rough stretch there, 8-28 in 2.25 seasons. I know there was some year 1 to year 2 growth, but the Saints feel like a team that are knocking on the door of kind of a very hard reset. And maybe that's probably the best thing that can happen for them. And I'm worried that Dennis Allen's not necessarily going to be viewed as the guy that's going to get them over the hump.
Yeah, it's very interesting to kind of look at him and the situation that the Saints are in right now, where you have a head coach and a quarterback that are the head coach and quarterback for now, but there's not a future trajectory right now for either one of those guys that feels like a 5, 6, 7 year tenure beyond this point. And that's very unusual for a New Orleans Saints franchise that's very used to having answers, and right now is stuck asking a ton of questions. Because even where Derek Carr was at his best, it was over the course of the last 5 or 6 games of the season. And that has been the story of the New Orleans Saints these past 2 years. They've gotten really, really good late in the season, or gotten to their best, let me say, late in the season, to the point where the run happens too late. It doesn't matter anymore. You're already out of that playoff conversation. And then you end up in a situation where you're waiting for somebody else to win you into the playoffs. You want to control your own destiny. And so far, the New Orleans Saints, with this present regime, haven't shown the capability to be able to control their own destiny. Next thing I want to take a look at here, Joe, too, is which one of those returning coaches that's in that mix can see themselves maybe in the best position to take a big step forward. Let's get to that next as we continue on the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of the Peacock Williamson NFL Show is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. It's the formula for winning championships, but it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Whether you're looking for superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, exhaust kits, eBay Motors has everything you're looking for and more. So whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has it. And of course, they have over 122 parts to fit your vehicle as well to help level up that number one ride or die of yours. You're always going to be able to find exactly what you're looking for at ebaymotors.com. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit the first time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, eBay Motors is everything that you need to be able to level your car up to peak performance and bring home those wins with your new MVP. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit available only to U.S. customers. All right, everybody, continuing on with today's episode of the Peacock Williamson NFL Show. Here is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen. And of course, checking out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 stream as well. All the biggest stories programmed just for you every single day with the Locked On local experts that actually know the teams that they're talking about. So go and check it out today on the Locked On Sports Today YouTube page, as well as on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I wanted to bridge the conversation here, Joe, a little bit around not the guy that's maybe in the worst situation amongst this group towards the bottom five, but looking at the remaining four: Chicago Bears head coach Matt Eberflus, New York Giants head coach Brian Daboll, Robert Saleh of the New York Jets, and Jonathan Gannon of the Arizona Cardinals. Which one of them is set up sort of with the most fortuitous opportunity here in 2024 to maybe move out of those bottom rankings and move their profile up a bit?
I think you can make a strong case for any one of them. I think there's a level of optimism that I have for each one of them, but I think the answer to the question should be Robert Saleh with the New York Jets. I mean,
feels like it's time, right?
It's got to happen, right? I mean, you look at the situation. We know they have a defense. That's not even worth talking about. This is a 7-10 team the last 2 years with Zach Wilson as the quarterback because of the defense. And now you get excited if you're a Jets fan that, okay, the most important thing in the NFL is quarterback play. You go from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers. I mean, that's huge. You look at maybe Atlanta as the only other team that can say that they've had that significant of a quarterback leap, right? Going from like Desmond Ridder to Kirk Cousins, right? And that's a big, big deal. But I think with Aaron Rodgers returning from injury, and that doesn't come without question. He's 40. Sure. He didn't play last year with an Achilles, and the year before was his worst season, right? With Green Bay. So there's plenty to be concerned about. Or there's plenty of reason to not be confident that Aaron Rodgers, like MVP caliber Aaron Rodgers, is going to show up this year. But my goodness, he's got to be better than Zach Wilson. And the elevated performance there, combined with the defense, combined with a much improved offensive line, they got to stay healthy. There's no question there, but that offensive line is so much better. Yeah. That's the coach, right? Because there's all the eggs are in the basket. It's do or die. There's high stakes. There's high pressure. There's no question. But he's got the stuff. I think he's got the roster to win football games. And I think the fact that they were 7-10 each of the last 2 years says something about Robert Saleh. Can he put it all together this year? I feel like he's the one that should get out of the basement here and start to show us who he really is as a head coach.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And look, I mean, you also have other teams around the division. I mean, not other teams. The thing that makes them tough is the other teams, right? The Buffalo Bills, really good. The Miami Dolphins, really good. Now, thankfully for, I guess, everybody, you're away from, in the AFC East, the Tom Brady era of the New England Patriots. New England Patriots are kind of figuring out who they're going to be moving forward, with Gerard Mayo now leading the way. But you have the opportunity here to at least not finish in the basement, right? Like to take some type of step forward here and to maybe be able to do that. And you've got at least a quarterback, maybe not the quarterback, certainly not the quarterback of the future, just based on how time works and how age works. But you've got the quarterback to get it done. So it feels like this is the time to do that. And look, if you want the top 10 as well, Joe and Kyle Krabs over at Locked On NFL Scouting broke down the entire top 10 the other day. So make sure you go and check that out over at Locked On NFL Scouting, which you can find on your favorite podcast and on YouTube as well. Just search Locked On NFL Scouting and you'll find it. But I wanted to ask you about this specific group within the top 10. We were talking about, or we wanted to kind of hit some of these coaches that can maybe move themselves into, let's call it upper status, right? Maybe start knocking at the door of elite status. And there's kind of this group 7 to 12 on your rankings that includes like Matt LaFleur of the Green Bay Packers, Sean McDermott of the Buffalo Bills, Dan Campbell of the Detroit Lions, and a couple others. It feels like one of the guys in there that has a real opportunity, or at least has been knocking at the door most consistently recently of moving up, is your very own Sean McDermott of the Buffalo Bills. Is he the one that has maybe the best opportunity to maybe jump up a tier, or is there another guy maybe that's threatening in that area?
It's an interesting way to look at it. Sean McDermott, I think most people look at the Bills this year as maybe a candidate of a team to regress a little bit. They've
Right.
certainly had a lot of success, 4 division titles in a row, 4 years in a row with the playoff win. The only team that can say that they did that besides the Bills is the Chiefs. They've been really good. And there's a level of frustration, I think, maybe from pundits who have continuously predicted the Bills to have the breakthrough and win the Super Bowl, and they've stalled out when they get to the Chiefs or the Bengals in the playoffs. And maybe they're falling out of the good graces a little bit. And so maybe that helps Sean McDermott, where maybe this is the moment where, all right, back's against the wall. There's some doubt, right? Nobody's predicting us. Well, I'm not going to say that. In the past, it felt like everybody was predicting the Bills to win the Super Bowl the last 2 years, and then they didn't.
Yeah.
So finally, Sean McDermott's like, all right, there's some doubt. You know, he might be happy about that. And certainly the Bills had made some calculated choices here with their roster, having to transition away from several players, a lot for age and salary cap reasons, and of course trading away Stefon Diggs. I don't know that you look at the Bills right now roster-wise and say, yeah, they've got the same level of talent that they've had the last few years, but I still think it's a team that has a very good roster with an elite level quarterback and a lot going for them, and a team that has been battle tested and faced a lot of adversity. And, you know, I think it's probably more circumstantial than anything as the reasons that they haven't gotten over the hump in the playoffs. I mean, we're talking about this as a team that has won a playoff game each of the last 4 years, 5 years in a row, double-digit wins. It's not like that when you say breakthrough,
this isn't a bottom-dwelling team.
Right. Breakthrough's different when it comes to the Buffalo Bills. They've learned a lot. You like to think that perhaps they can apply a lot of that to this new nucleus. And I think that's what's interesting to me. You've been waiting to kind of get over the hump with the previous nucleus. And I think we learned that the ceiling of that team was to get to the Chiefs and Bengals and lose, right? So put on a new set of tires and see if that pair of wheels can get you a little higher over the hump, right? I mean, that's kind of the way I'm optimistically looking at it, but I think there's outcomes for the Bills this year that maybe do lead to a regression. Like, I can absolutely be convinced of that. And so the vantage point with Sean McDermott is interesting this year. If he does it with this team, I think that changes all of the conversations, obviously, with Sean McDermott, even if they like get to the Super Bowl and lose. You know, I think that the fact that he did it with a team that maybe people perceive less would speak volumes for him. So he's interesting, but I kind of look at like a Matt LaFleur, you know, in what he was able to do with the Green Bay Packers this past season. What were they, 3-6? And they rally and they have like the crazy young football team and, you know, no true number one receiver, question marks everywhere. And, you know, they rally and Jordan Love looks like he's going to be, you know, the next thing at quarterback in the NFL and, you know, really competitive even in the playoff loss, right? I mean, they certainly had the capacity to win that game. So I think Matt LaFleur is a coach that probably in the NFC has a easier path. And so you talk about like the team, like I think it's more likely that a team like Green Bay breaks through or a team like Detroit breaks through based on their circumstances as teams that you feel like have added, right? Have had success and are ready to kind of go there. And maybe you don't look at the Bills the same way, although I wouldn't be surprised if it was the Bills. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's interesting because like you can kind of put the Matt LaFleur conversation and the Sean McDermott conversation and just have them like look at themselves like a mirror in a way, right? In terms of what maybe not necessarily what the expectations are, but with the way that the roster is constructed, either of those guys finding success reflects directly on them. In any case where if it's kind of a regression, then there's things that you point to in the roster and you say, well, that was kind of expected that there could be a regression there. This team's young. This team's kind of retooling some things. They had to move on from a couple different players, things like that. But it feels like both of them are set up I mean, don't get me wrong, they'd still get criticism by regressing. Like, I'm not trying to say that they're free of criticism here, but it does feel like both of them have a real opportunity here in 2024. If they succeed with the roster that they have, that people are going to look back at that. I think about Sean Payton in 2017, just as somebody that covers the New Orleans Saints. That was pretty, like, they had those 3 7-9 seasons and things like that. Then they had this super young roster. And then all of a sudden they were back to being this really good team and had this really good stretch, 2017, 18, 19. And a lot of that reflected on head coach Sean Payton in New Orleans, that like, oh, look what he did with this young group. Look what he did with this roster that we didn't expect to succeed after, kind of stepping back for the last 3 years and things like that, specifically defensively in those days. And so I could see both of those guys absolutely in that conversation. I want to continue our conversation around the Buffalo Bills by taking a look at not just Sean McDermott, but also Josh Allen and where he ranks either today or over the course of history amongst quarterbacks that do things that feels like only Josh Allen can do. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with the Peacock Williamson NFL Show, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, football fans, continuing on and wrapping up today's episode of the Peacock Williamson NFL Show. You've got Joe Marino at the Joe Marino on your favorite social media. Myself, Ross Jackson at Ross Jackson Nola. We're taking a look now at the Buffalo Bills. We kind of looked at the Buffalo Bills a little bit yesterday, Joe, Matt, and I, when we were taking a look at offensive lines across the NFL. He looked at the Buffalo Bills offensive line as an above-average group, so a positive outlook there. But I don't think that the positive outlook stops in the trenches for this team. There's still a lot of positive outlook, even though it feels like some of the general narrative can lean a little bit more to the negative, at least more than we're accustomed to for these Buffalo Bills. So I want to take a look at Josh Allen here, this tremendous quarterback that is kind of one of one in the NFL. Where do you look at him when it comes to dual threat quarterbacks? Like, where would you rank him, when it comes to dual threat quarterbacks in today's NFL? Is he one of the best, the best? Where do you have him?
Well, I think the conversation is centered around Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts, right? I think there's some young quarterbacks that look like they're going to be in that conversation. But in terms of an established amount of resume, I think you look at those 3 guys. I think what's different about Josh Allen and any dual threat quarterback that we discuss, whether it's Lamar Jackson, whether it's Jalen Hurts, whether it's Michael Vick or Cam Newton or Randall Cunningham, whoever you want to invoke, the difference between Josh Allen and all of them is the passing component. Maybe there's more dynamic runners. Lamar Jackson's a more dynamic runner than Josh Allen. Like, make you miss ability and speed. Like, he's unmatched, right? Josh Allen runs different, right? He runs people over. And it was interesting. I listened to Luke Kuechly on Kay Adams' show recently, and he was asked who he would rather face. Would he rather face Lamar Jackson or Cam Newton? And he said, I'd rather face Lamar. He says, Lamar will go down. Cam Newton's going to run me over on 3rd down, right? It's a different conversation. Josh Allen's got that. Anybody that's watched Josh Allen play a quarter of football knows he's got that in him.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the production speaks for itself. I mean, he's got 53 rushing touchdowns. That's second most all-time among NFL quarterbacks, just behind Cam Newton at 75. And Josh Allen's outpacing him right now in terms of the career. And it's the passing production. There's only been 3 seasons in the NFL where a quarterback passed for over 4,250 passing yards and had 500 rushing touchdowns. All 3 of them are Josh Allen's. So when you want to really embrace dual threat, it's the running ability that I think kind of gets most of the conversation. But to me, it's the combination. It's the passing ability and the running ability. And so I think Josh Allen's right there in terms of running ability. It's the passing piece of the conversation that I think elevates Josh Allen to a different status than you get from a Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts. And looking at this current landscape of dual threat quarterbacks, I know that Lamar Jackson's the one that's going to, the fans are 2-time MVP and all that.
Sure. Yeah.
The passing production's not close.
Right.
It's not even close. Like, he's a low volume passing producer. And then you want to talk playoffs? We can do that and talk about how the Ravens have scored more than 20 points once in the history of Lamar Jackson's playoff runs, and he's not been particularly good. So I don't know. Call me a homer, whatever you want to say. I think Josh Allen's the premier dual threat quarterback in today's NFL.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
knocking
it sounds
on
like
the door historically, right? I mean, like, he's right there.
Exactly. Yeah, I was just about to say, it sounds like, I mean, he's up there historically as well. And I want to highlight 2 things that you mentioned. I love that we don't include Patrick Mahomes in this conversation. I really do, because I think there's a difference between a dual threat quarterback and a quarterback that can run. right? Those are two very, very different things. And so I want to address that, and I want to highlight that, because I do think that we're talking about a smaller group in today's NFL than I think a lot of people would notice. Now, obviously, like Anthony Richardson can eventually become a part of that conversation, but as you mentioned, that's a guy that has to A, stay healthy, B, prove it, right? We're talking about guys that are established here. The other thing that I think is really important is that you're right. There's a lot of times where when we talk about the dual threat quarterback, we focus so much on the running component, but we don't focus on, it's literally dual threat. Two things, and those two things are running and the passing component. And so I completely agree with you there when it comes to Josh Allen. So
one note here I got to make on Patrick Mahomes.
Please.
I got to expand on the Patrick Mahomes point.
Yeah.
If we were talking about the greatest quarterback ever, okay, Patrick Mahomes, you have entered the chat. Yeah, Patrick Mahomes has 12 career rushing touchdowns. Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen had more last season. Right? So, like, miss me with the idea that he's truly a dual threat quarterback.
Completely agree with that. I think that, like, there's the quarterback that can escape. Joe Burrow, right, falls in that conversation as well. You know what I mean? But that doesn't make him a dual threat quarterback. And no one would ever enter Joe Burrow in the dual quarterback conversation. Right. That's the way that I look at it with Patrick Mahomes too. So good point to highlight there. In addition to Josh Allen, what are you looking at in terms of this Bills team right now? Everybody's focused so much on the regression. Where has it either maintained where it mostly needed, or where has the roster improved where it mostly needed?
Wow, that's really interesting. I think to the point that you made earlier about the offensive line, I think the Bills have a very good offensive line, and I'm excited to see it now in year 3 with Aaron Kromer. You know about Aaron Kromer. The guy's unbelievable, probably one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL, and you saw a massive jump in year 1 to year 2 with the group. And they got some developing young talent in an Osiris Torrance and a Spencer Brown. Deion Dawkins is coming off his best season.
Big dudes, by the way.
Yeah, big and athletic, right? Just extremely athletic dudes. And they pull their tackles and do a lot of fun stuff in the run game. And so I think leaning into that offensive line and what you've seen from James Cook in this rushing offense outside of Josh Allen is pretty exciting. And I think that's going to be a staple of who this team is. I think the passing game is going to be very interesting. I mean, you have 308 of Josh Allen's 545 targets from last year vacated, right? It's just unbelievable. And what's interesting is there's so much conversation about Stefon Diggs, and he's not part of this mix anymore. And I would argue that the transition away from Stefon Diggs happened last year during the season. It's not as new of a thing as maybe some people think. Last season, down the stretch over the last 12 games, Khalil Shakir outproduced Stefon Diggs on 60 less targets. You heard that correctly. On 60 less targets over the last
6-0, ladies and gentlemen.
More production. Dalton Kincaid led the team in receiving over the last 12 weeks. Right. It's like the transition's already happened. The Bills aren't transitioning away from 2021 Stefon Diggs or 2020 Stefon Diggs. It was the one that it didn't click with the offense when it was taken over by Joe Brady, and Stefon Diggs obviously had his whatever personal circumstances existed there. And I think the Bills, I'm not going to diminish the loss of a talent like Stefon Diggs, but I don't think it's as overnight of a thing as maybe some people think. The catalyst for the offense for the Bills last year that was a number 2 seed in the AFC that had the Chiefs on the ropes in the divisional round was James Cook and Khalil Shakir and Dalton Kincaid. And those guys are all back, and they've added around those players plus the offensive line. I think that's how you have to look at this offense, not necessarily what are they going to do without Stefon Diggs and Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis had like 5 games on the stretch where he didn't have a catch, right? The transition happened. And they're building off of that. Defensively is where I think most of my questions lie.
Yeah,
I think the offense is going to be interesting. How Josh Allen operates without a true number 1 receiver could be fascinating, right? No pressure to funnel 160 targets to Stefon Diggs. It could change his progressions and all that. I'm interested. The defense is where regular season Bills defense is awesome. But my goodness, if you want to talk about what's failing the Bills in the playoffs, it's defense. The defense isn't showing up for Josh Allen against Kansas City or Cincinnati. That's the problem. And what do you have? Like, did it get better? No, I don't think it did, right? Like, Leonard Floyd's gone. You hope Von Miller at 35 has a pulse as a pass rusher. Matt Milano coming off of injury. I think the secondary is going to be fine, but to me, can they be situationally better in the playoffs on defense? Can they get enough pass rush? Can their defensive line win up front? With a gutted coaching staff. I mean, they lost Eric Washington. They lost John Butler, who's a really good secondary coach. Of course, Leslie Frazier last year. A lot of transition on the defensive side of the football to do the Saints thing. Not quite as extreme. The only coach on the Bills defensive staff that's in the same position that they were last year is Joe Dana, the safeties coach. So a lot of new voices, a lot of new players, right? Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, no longer there. I think the defense is going to define how deep the Bills go this year, which you feel good about because you have good coaching acumen with Sean McDermott and Bobby Babbage taking over.
Yeah.
Young players. There's a lot to like. How that comes together and how they execute in the biggest moments is going to define the Bills season.
Yeah, you can have the framework all you want, but what's the execution look like? That's going to be the biggest thing. And we're not going to know that until these teams hit the field. As we wrap up here, Joe, real quick, when it comes to the Buffalo Bills, not what is the expectation, not what was the expectation, not what was the or is the national expectation. What should be the expectation for the Buffalo Bills in 2024?
I think that the expectations for the Buffalo Bills should be to continue to remain among the best teams in the NFL with a new nucleus. And my philosophy, and I think every team's philosophy, should be as good as you can for as long as you can. And you got to hope you get lucky along the way at some point, right? Every team that does it, they have some fortuitous moments, right? It's single elimination playoffs. It's a weird shaped football. The referees get involved, right? Like, you know what I mean?
Yes,
like you want to, what you need to have is a repeatable process that gives you a chance every single year. Sean McDermott has 1,000,000% proved that. And so I'm looking for them to stay in that stratosphere. And then the piece of it, you hope that it goes your way at some point in the postseason, or, I know that chance favors the prepared. I get all that type of stuff, but I'm looking for the Bills to, if you want to get more specific, be a double-digit win team, win the AFC East for a 5th season in a row, win at least a playoff game. Would you love to knock off the Chiefs? Man, you sure would, right? All of that's still there, and I think that's the type of team that the Bills should be. Will it go their way in the biggest moments? I think that's where you cross your fingers and hope.
Oh, man, that's awesome. It's the NFL, man, it is the world's most fun game of variables is the way I like to refer to it. And boy, that oblong football sure does play a big role. If y'all want more from Joe Marino, you're going to find him every single day, twice every single day over at Locked On Bills and over at Locked On NFL Scouting. Locked On Bills giving you everything you need to know about the Buffalo Bills every single Monday through Friday and more. And then you can go and check out Locked On NFL Scouting, where you're getting the most in-depth and absolute elite breakdowns on team management, roster building, the NFL, and much more. So make sure you go and check out our good friend Joe, and you can follow him as well at the Joe Marino on your favorite social media. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show a part of your day, and of course for being an everydayer and making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We will be back with you on Monday as Matt Williamson returns for more in-depth elite looks at how the NFL will shake out in 2024. We'll see you here soon. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.